What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We are coming at you from Indianapolis, the NFL Scouting Combine. Two more phenomenal guests for you in this edition. Earlier in the week, we talked to Charlie Weis and Nick Caserio about what might be next for the Patriots coaching staff, what might be next for Bill Belichick in terms of the energy that he'll have to expend as there's been so much coaching turnover on his staff. Today, we get into what's next for the Patriots in this particular draft and what's next for the league in terms of some rules that might be changing this offseason. So we're talking to Pro Football Focus's Mike Renner, their lead draft analyst, and we're playing a little game with him. We want to hear about day one and day two prospects that he thinks could fit with the Patriots at receiver, corner, and linebacker. A bunch of names that we all have to know before we get to the draft in late April. We're also talking to the NFL Network's Judy Battista. Our friend Judy is plugged in more so than anyone else when it comes to the competition committee conversations that are happening behind the scenes right now. What's going on with the taunting rule? How about the overtime rules for 2022? And is the punt slowly but surely being phased out of the NFL? Fascinating conversation with Judy, but let's get right to our conversation first with PFF's Mike Renner. All right, very excited now to have with us on the Next Pats podcast, Pro Football Focus's draft czar, Mike Renner. Mike, thanks for being with us. Just gave you a nickname. You just told me you never had a nickname before. There you go, bud.
I was going to say, that's on my LinkedIn now, draft czar.
Perfect. Put it right there at the very top. You're doing phenomenal work for PFF. Nobody knows these prospects the way you do. And so we need to play a little game here.
Yeah.
We played this game with you last year. We're going to ask you for, I don't think we're going to get all the way into day three because it's still early in the process here. But I'm going to ask you for some day one and day two names at positions that we're hot on here in New England. But let me ask you first. Is there a position, you're not just studying the prospects, you're studying the teams and the team needs as well. Is there a position that you think the Patriots desperately need to address early?
Desperately need to address? I think they need a difference maker wide receiver. And now, you kind of did that 2 years ago, and it backfired with N'Keal Harry. But, like, a number one, a guy that really is a go-to guy in that offense, I think could elevate it to another level. Because I like the receiving core as it's built, but you have a lot of complementary guys. And so you get I'm just saying Devontae Adams, but like you get a number one in there. You get a Jamar Chase. You could have a Jamar Chase type of impact on Mac Jones. You could take him to that level of it makes everyone else around him better and just gives you an offense that has so much just options to go to. That's what I think would be the one guy that really could take that team to another level.
That N'Keal Harry miss hurts so much because that's really the spot they're missing. Mm-hmm. They have Nelson Aguilar, who played the X receiver spot for them pretty much all last year. The way they had it set up was Jacoby Myers was the slot. Kendrick Bourne was the Z, who kind of did a little bit of everything. They would hand it off to him occasionally. And Aguilar on the outside. Is there, or let me put it to you this way. Give me the best X receiver fits at, I would say, between picks 20 and 50-ish, because the Patriots are picking at 21 and 53, I think.
I think your dream scenario is someone like Drake London falls to you, the USC wide receiver, but that is more of a pipe dream. I really don't think that's happening.
Is he not N'Keal Harry-ish, though? He's not fast.
He's a little bit.
Big,
he's
a contested catch guy. That gets people very scared back
at
home. You hear
bit.
that description, and it's like, oh.
But he's a different animal.
PTSD.
Than N'Keal Harry was. I didn't like N'Keal Harry coming out, and I love Drake London coming out. So that'll tell you that like he is, and I don't go for that type of wide receiver. To me, I think it's the basketball background for Drake London. Like you see him being able to cross over guys with ease. And now N'Keal Harry had some tackle breaking ability, but he really wasn't as loose of an athlete. Like you saw him get stuck at the line of scrimmage all the time. You don't see that with Drake London. Like you see him, like I said, like the crossovers, like he has that move down already to where I don't worry about him struggling with press coverage the way N'Keal Harry has. But I think the more realistic option would be someone like Garrett Wilson from Ohio State. To me, he is perfect for that offense in that he can be your outside guy, but he also runs like that underneath route tree very well that New England's known for. A lot of those shiftier guys have had success in that offense. That is him. He can do that, and now he's a little bit of a work in progress. He's not quite the polished products we've come to expect from Ohio State wide receivers, but to me, I think he's going to have a big combine. This week is going to be big for him. He tests well, and he may not make it there, but he is that level of just guy who can win at every single level of the football field that they've been missing.
How about maybe in the second round? Is there somebody in the middle of that range that would play that spot on the outside and just kind of fit nicely right in there with Bourne and Myers?
I think the guy I'd be targeting if I'm the Patriots in the second round is someone like Sky Moore out of Western Michigan, who is kind of God, is everything I said about Garrett Wilson you could say about Sky Moore, but he just played at Western Michigan instead of Ohio State, so he's not going to get the level of competition. Exactly, you're not going to get the competition. As much as everyone wants to say, oh, if you have talent, they'll find you. You feel a lot better about the guy who has shown that talent against top competition than the guy who is beating up corners who aren't sniffing the NFL. So to me, if Sky Moore did play against better competition, he'd be getting talked about as a first rounder, but he didn't. You still have worries about how that's going to look once he gets to the NFL, kind of similar to like Deontay Johnson coming out of Toledo, where he showed everything there at Toledo, but he did it at Toledo, and so he drops to the third round. So I think that could be Sky Moore in this year's draft.
Similar skill sets, it sounds like, too, between those two guys, because they are so shifty, and their ability to create separation with their movement skills feels similar.
And that's what you need. I think with Mac Jones especially, like the way he plays quarterback, he's kind of a shooter that you need to give him a lot of open looks. You give him open looks, he's going to hit them all. You're going to knock him down. He's Klay Thompson when he gets open looks, but Klay Thompson can't create on his own. He's not going to, throw a N'Keal Harry open as much as he has. If N'Keal Harry is open, he's definitely going to hit him. So a guy like Sky Moore, a guy like Garrett Wilson, those guys can get open.
Okay, so we got two receivers, both that you think could kind of live on the outside, even though they're not necessarily the prototypical X-body type.
But I think that's like gone by the wayside. Like
you
Antonio
think so?
Brown, like the outside wide receivers nowadays, they're more 6'1" to 5'11" than they are 6'3" plus, in my opinion.
So. Well, and I think maybe it just speaks to the importance of actually creating separation and not just depending on the fact that you will win every contested situation along the boundary. Yeah. If we flip sides in terms of over to the defense now, I think the Patriots are going to be looking for a guy to cover those guys on the outside, because it sounds like Mr. INT, J.C. Jackson, is going to be looking for money that the Patriots may not be willing to pay. So, again, let's look in that 20 to 50-ish range. Maybe that takes Sauce Gardner out of it. I know that's somebody that the Patriots have been impressed by. But who are some of those boundary guys that could play the Patriots style too? We know they love to play that press man defense.
Yeah, press man. I think the biggest things you're looking for in press man coverage is length and or athleticism. High-end athletes win in man coverage, and guys who have elite length that can shut you down at the line of scrimmage, those guys win in man coverage. So the guy I'd probably highlight in the first round that could very feasibly be there is Andrew Booth from Clemson. He is that just do-it-all kind of athlete who also has, I think he's going to come in with pretty long arms. He has good length for the position, just a solid physical all-around profile that's what you have to have for man coverage. If you're slow, if you don't have length, if you don't have it, you're not even going to get thrown out in man coverage because you're going to get toasted at the NFL level. So you have to cover those guys, and they don't last too long. But to me, Booth didn't play in a scheme at Clemson that really showcased that. They played a lot more off this year than they have in years past, so he's not up getting in guys' faces. So you could almost be getting a discount on a guy who would have been better. So, Sauce Gardner is who you mentioned. He lived in press man coverage, and that's what he's good at. But if he was playing off zone, it could have looked like how Andrew Booth looked this past year. If you flip those two situations, you could be talking about those guys very differently in my eyes. So that's a guy who I'd highlight that was likely going to be there and would fit their scheme.
How about second round? The name that I find interesting because he's coming from the SEC. We know the Patriots love those guys. Again, a guy who looks built to play press man on the outside, be Kaiir Elam.
That's what I was going to say.
Would he get to that range, or is he maybe going to sneak into the first round? I've seen him in some first-round mocks.
So he had a rough year, banged up with injury, but his guy's been starting at Florida since he was a freshman. He had a really big sophomore year. So you kind of a descending prospect, but you still buy into the guys who are good early on in their careers. To me, that speaks to innate talent. You're not good in the SEC as a freshman with no coaching if you're not, have some physical ability behind you. So he's a guy who I think does slip to either the way back end of the first round or into the second round. It would not surprise me whatsoever, because he's a guy who's only going to be coveted really by the press man schemes. He is not an off-zone corner at all. He is not that type of guy. He has got to be at the line of scrimmage to win. And there's not a lot of teams that rely on that anymore. And literally with the proliferation of Fangio's scheme, press is going out of vogue. And so that's why you're seeing this guy slip in mock drafts. But that's to the Patriots' advantage, to where he could be there in the second round, and a value for them because not a lot of other teams will run that defense.
Sounds like value to me. Bill Belichick loves his value. Playing a defense that not many other teams play. I don't know. Maybe they end up drafting a nose tackle in the first round or something because nobody else wants to do that. Yeah. But let's get to the last position that I know people at home are thinking a lot about these days, Mike, is linebacker. Dante Hightower's a free agent. Juwan Bentley's a free agent. The Patriots have had a type at off-the-ball linebacker for a long, long time. 250 pounds, come downhill in the run game, blow up guards 101. That's usually what they like. I think they would be open to a little bit smaller linebacker if they had at least one big body next to that guy. So maybe you have the big-bodied Mike and the smaller Will off the line of scrimmage. All that being said, that range that we're talking about, 20 to 50, are there large humans that play that position that you could see fitting into Bill Belichick's scheme?
Yeah, the Patriots are not going for the underside. They're not keeping up with the trends of these fast, safety transition hybrids. And there is one guy in this class that, like, if he doesn't go to the Patriots, he's going to go to a Bill Belichick disciple at linebacker, and it's Leo Chenal from Wisconsin. That, like, this guy was born to play in that defense because for PFF grading, he had the highest pass rushing grade of any off-ball linebacker in the NCAA last year, and the highest run defense grade of any off-ball linebacker. Like, he comes downhill. I think he's going to break the linebacker bench press record here at the Combine. He's already has a video of him on his Twitter doing 40 bench press reps at 225. He is a horse. He takes on blocks one-on-one against offensive linemen better than the edge rushers in this draft class. So he is a physical specimen that, like, I think for the Patriots, like, that's a first round. Like, he's not a guy you wait to the second round, even despite him playing linebacker. I think he's a first round type of talent.
You take him at 21.
Like, I probably would.
You're a Wisconsin guy.
I am from Wisconsin.
Yeah,
so this is not
we
really
can all hear it in your voice. So I just want to make sure that people understand that.
It's definitely, though, the fit in that scheme would not be like, it is the ideal fit that Dante Hightower goes to any other scheme in the NFL, and he's not Dante Hightower. It's not who he is. But Leo Chenal goes to anywhere else in the NFL, he's not Leo Chenal. But if he goes to the Patriots, he can, I don't say seamlessly replace Dante Hightower. No one can seamlessly replace Dante Hightower. You saw that in 2020. But he can, in time, be that guy.
Anybody in the second round who would have a similar skill set in that he looks built to be able to play that style and maybe even have some versatility? I mean, Hightower's a great example of somebody, and again, he was a first-round pick.
Yeah.
But if you can do the off-the-ball and end-of-the-line-of-scrimmage thing, or you've shown you can do that, that raises your value in the Patriots' eyes too.
Yeah, it does. And there really aren't a ton of guys in this draft class after him, which is why I say maybe you're going to have to go get him in the first round, because if in that mold, it is really Leo Chenal and then nobody. So that, to me, I don't think there's really a second rounder that I'd highlight. It's a pretty strong linebacker class with some guys in the 240-plus pound range with like a Christian Harris, who, like you said, they could go for a smaller guy. He's a guy who really comes downhill, one of the better blitzing linebackers.
And an Alabama guy.
The Alabama linebacker who, would. But he's not in that mold that you're talking about, the 250-plus. He is on the smaller side, probably 235.
How about Quay Walker? Because that's a name that I've heard some people bring up to me as a little bit bigger body guy, not quite Leo Chenal size, but also has some speed. And I think that's what, if you watch the Patriots go against the Bills, they just looked slow at times. And so maybe he can give them a little juice there. Yeah,
Quay Walker's probably going to run low 4.5s at 240 pounds. But kind of like the weird thing about Quay Walker, why I didn't highlight him as a fit, is because he doesn't take on blocks well, which is like oddly, he's a run and hit. He's almost like a weak side linebacker and a Mike linebacker body. He's like the guy you want to keep protected so he can fly to the football. And then he's a great tackler, and then he can wrap up well in space. But he's just not a guy who has that physicality that, like I said, Christian Harris, Leo Chenal, Dante Hightower, the Patriots have covered it over the years.
Maybe he ends up being a little bit like a Jamie Collins. Because that's sort of what Jamie Collins was. He was big, and he was really explosive, but he didn't really want to take on blocks either. That's not really what they were expecting from him, at least. So bunch of great names there from Mike Renner. Nobody better. Guys, just rattle them off the top of his brain. No problem. Scheme fit, round fit. You gave it all to us, Mike. Thanks a lot.
No, appreciate having me on.
All right, great stuff there from Mike Renner. I can tell you just from speaking with people around the league these last few days in Indianapolis, as far as that cornerback conversation we just had with Mike is concerned, the Patriots are looked at as being a team and being a defense that really requires having a number one lockdown corner. You have to have at least one. You don't have to have a secondary loaded with them, but if you want to play press man on the outside and you want to match up across the board, you really need that guy. So the expectation from the people I've spoken to here in Indy is that the Patriots will find a way to bring J.C. Jackson back, because the alternative would mean potentially changing their scheme, which is something that they have been, in some ways, at least from the outside looking in, a little bit reluctant to do. They've just built their defense to play a certain way, and so they need to get the personnel that they need to be able to play that same style without J.C. Jackson. Maybe they're not able to do that, although if J.C. Jackson walks, maybe it's Andrew Booth from Clemson. Maybe it's Kaiir Elam from Florida, a couple guys that Renner just mentioned that the Patriots would have to invest an early draft pick in and then ask them to not necessarily be a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro, but be a legitimate number one, quote unquote, outside the numbers type of corner that you can build your man-to-man scheme around. So I thought the corner conversation there with Mike was great. Let's get to our conversation now with Judy Battista. She is all over the competition committee information that is circulating in Indianapolis right now. I know you all are interested in what will happen with the overtime rules, so let's get right to our conversation with Judy. All right, very happy to have with us now NFL Network's Judy Battista, who's so excited to be on the Next Pats podcast that she just took her cell phone and spiked it on the ground just so that it wouldn't interrupt our conversation.
Like Gronk.
Yes, very Gronkowski-esque move. I didn't think we would see that from you, but we're back at the Combine. Everybody's very excited, and anything can happen. How are you?
Great. Actually glad to be back at the Combine. It's good.
Same. It feels nice and normal, and we're hearing from a lot of NFL executives, but there are also some meetings behind the scenes happening here. And that's what I want to ask you about, because you're so great keeping us up to date on how the league might be changing. So on the Next Pats podcast, we're talking about what's next, usually for that specific team, but for the league overall, this is an important week. Competition committee.
Yes.
How often are they meeting, and how many rules might we see changed this offseason?
So this is the first week of in-person meetings for the competition committee. They basically meet most of the off-season, and then that big March meeting that we're always at, that's when votes are taken to change rules. There's some pretty big topics this year. Overtime is really on the agenda, not surprisingly after what we saw in the postseason. Changing the punt is a big one, maybe kind of nerdy, but that's going to be a big change because they have some concussion issues on punts that they need to get down. Taunting is a point of emphasis, and I don't think that's going away. I think we should expect that we're going to see that be a point of emphasis. So there's actually some big items on the rules agenda.
So you would have been fined for that spike of the phone, probably, because it was.
But I didn't point in anybody's face.
Well, it was sort of in my direction. I don't know. We go back on the replay, but that one will not go away. It sounds like.
No, they believe it's sportsmanship. That they can't back away from sportsmanship. They say, the league says there were 61 penalties for taunting, and they feel 56 of them were officiated correctly. So it's just a matter of addressing some of the ticky-tack ones that they didn't like, but they don't want this, and they don't want you standing over the opponent and taunting, and they feel like they got to get that out of the game. And apparently, maybe counterintuitively, it is the coaches driving this. They do not want taunting in the game.
That's interesting that it would be the guys on the sideline who understand that it is an emotional game, and it feels like a rule that is trying to legislate emotion out of the game to a degree. But this sounds like it has, for the people who matter, who make the rules, it sounds like it has almost universal approval.
I think they feel like this is a sportsmanship issue, and you cannot back away from sportsmanship. You can't, you've got to enforce it.
You've got to enforce it. You cannot back away from sportsmanship, but you must back away from anyone that you might feel compelled to taunt.
Yeah, they actually cited one that they did not feel was officiated correctly, and that was J.J. Watt was penalized. He made a tackle near the sideline. He was backing away, but I guess he and the opponent were maybe yelling at each other, but not certainly not touching each other, and they flagged J.J. Watt, and they feel that was probably officiated incorrectly.
So words are okay, but it's the pointing?
I think, I certainly think anything they feel is going to escalate, they want that out.
How about the punt? You mentioned the punt. It might be a nerdy change, but this is the podcast for nerdy changes. How are they going to change the punt? Obviously, player health and safety is of the utmost importance for everyone. Bill Belichick himself tells us that all the time, but how would they try to change the punt?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't even think they know the answer. It's tough. They had to do this 4 years ago with the kickoff. Same thing. They had a disproportionate number of concussions happening on kickoffs. At that time, they called special teams coaches together in New York in the offseason and basically said, what should we do? And they were coming up with all kinds of ideas. The kickoff is a little bit easier because what they essentially did was they diminished the number of kickoff returns, right? They incentivized it by if you don't return, we'll bring the ball out further, so that the number of kickoff returns went down, so did the number of concussions. Not that easy on the punt. They've got to come up with something. They're probably going to call special teams coaches together and say, what should we do? they are sort of backed into a corner. They have to do something because their health and safety statistics show a disproportionate number of concussions are happening on punts, not just to the gunners and not just to the returners, but like all across the field. So they got to address it somehow. We'll see what they come up with. But there will be a change. There's no way they can keep it the way it is.
Do you think we're on a slow and steady trek towards special teams in some ways being eliminated from football as we know it?
They say they are adamant that they are not trying to legislate the kick out of the game. Having said that, look, we've seen a lot of coaches, right, foregoing punting and just going for it on fourth down, and you may see more of that depending on what this rule looks like. They don't want to get rid of the kicking element. That's a traditional part of the game. They don't want to eliminate it, and they don't want to make it a non-competitive play. But at the same time, you're balancing, like, you also can't have concussions like that happening. So
I wonder if it would have to be something almost like you would incentivize kicking it into the end zone on the kickoff. Maybe for these return teams, if you're just trying to eliminate returns, right, maybe you somehow incentivize a fair catch. Maybe you don't just get it where you stand. Maybe you get it plus 10 something yards like or something to prevent people from even trying to take it back.
One point that was made was that the way the game is being played now, with coaches going for it more on fourth down, like if you're, in plus territory, right? If you're past the midfield, that you're not getting those short punts anymore. You're getting punts that are being punted from further back, so there's much more space. The problem with the punt is space and speed. So that's what you're trying to condense, right? Like all that space and guys running really fast and colliding, they produce huge hits and concussions. So that's going to be a tough one.
That'll be a really interesting one to follow. The one that I think has most folks' attention is this overtime rule. So I actually have been on an island, it feels like, at our station back at home when we talk about should they change it, why wouldn't they change it. To me, the numbers haven't been extremely drastic over the large sample size that the team that gets the ball first wins the game. The large sample size, which includes regular season games, would suggest it's pretty much a 50-50 split, or damn close. I know in the playoffs the numbers are far more skewed, and what we saw in the Chiefs-Bills game put it really even more so on everybody's radar. So do you think we're going to be in a new era of overtime come 2022?
I don't know. I think the Bengals in the AFC Championship game, losing the coin toss, holding Patrick Mahomes, and then winning the game, like lowered the temperature on that conversation. If the Chiefs had won the coin toss and won that game without Joe Burrow touching the ball, I think the conversation would have been over already and the rule would have been changed. Yeah. But I feel like there's a feeling in the league, like Troy Vincent was talking generally about rules changes yesterday, but he said like there's something like 41,000 plays in an NFL season. You can't be changing rules just because you don't like how 2 or 3 of those plays went. And I thought, now he was talking about a few things like taunting. He was talking about generally, but I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. Like, nobody loved the way the Chiefs-Bills game ended because it was like an all-time game. But, are you changing the entire structure of overtime because of that one game? I don't know. And more than that is, I don't get a good read for how folks feel. I think we're going to have to see what the proposal looks like. The Colts made a proposal that would change overtime for the regular season too. I'm not sure there's much appetite for changing it in the regular season because, as you said, it's like a 50-50 split in regular season. In overtime, it's much more skewed to the team, and the league statistics say it's because in overtime, you've got the best quarterbacks in the game, in postseason. If Aaron Rodgers wins the coin flip and you give him the ball, he's taking you down for a touchdown, the game's over. So that's why you look at it for postseason.
The proposal that I have seen is both teams would get a crack with the football, and then if it remains tied after that,
then it's sudden death.
Then it's back to the original rule.
Right.
Do you think that would satiate the people who don't like the rule the way it is right now? Because I feel like we might just be back into this spot where I think it would be better, and I think people would be more amenable to that rule versus what it is right now. But that's the issue to me is, well, then it just becomes sudden death again, and it's like, well, you won the toss, so you got it first. The other team had it, and then you got it third, and you won. It feels like we might just be back in the same spot.
I think what's going to make this interesting, Troy Vincent again made the point, there are some defensive-minded coaches on the competition committee now, Vrabel, Tomlin.
They have to hate this.
Right, and their attitude is going to be play defense, right? Like if you change overtime like this, you're basically completely discounting defenses. Or it's just like, who cares about the defense? They just put it in the quarterback's hands. And of course they're like, wait a minute, you have to play defense. Which is exactly what the Bengals did, right? I mean, I am curious to see what kind of rule they come up with. Does the competition committee put its weight behind it? That's a big thing. And then, to change any rule, you need 24 votes, which is a high bar for anything. I'm curious. I don't get a great sense about how it's going to go. I don't know.
A lot of interesting potential changes at play for the NFL. Judy, thanks for breaking them all down with us.
My pleasure. It's good to see you guys in person.
Great to see you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much, Judy Battista, NFL Network, Mike Renner, Pro Football Focus. We've all gotten much, much smarter just because we've had the opportunity to listen to those two fine individuals speak. So, hopefully you enjoyed that episode. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully you did as well. Keep an eye out for another Next Pats coming at you very, very soon. Very special guest. We've got Bucky Brooks of the NFL Network. He's got all kinds of draft knowledge to drop on us, so make sure you keep an eye out for that one, and we'll talk to you very soon.